Welcome. We're so grateful to have you here this morning.
Thanks for having me. And before we get started, I will formally introduce myself. My name is Karla Belzer, and I'm a family life educator with the University of Illinois Extension. I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to you about mindfulness, how you can close out your school year with mindfulness, maybe even to give you some ideas of some things that you can incorporate in your school, in your classroom next year, but also to help you focus on your own personal self-care. I think I'm muted.
Right.
Oh, now I'm unmuted. It's all good. This is one of my very favorite topics because I have found personal benefit from practicing mindfulness. So I'm really excited to be here today to share with you some background and some techniques of things that you can be doing to take better care of yourself and also to work better with your students and in your classrooms. But I also do want to recognize and say a big thank you to you all for all the great work that you do as teachers, as educational professionals, anyone involved in the school system. I just want to recognize you. I formatted my background especially for today. My hat is off to you, especially during this difficult time. I think I shared with you when I did the resilience webinar, I have been uplifted by my children's teacher as a parent during this difficult time. So I am just so thankful for everything that you all do in normal times, all that you're currently doing. So keep it up. You are certainly heroes. You are not going unnoticed. And I just wanted to share that with you today to get us started. So when we think about mindfulness, we're going to talk a lot about mindfulness today. And I just want you to kind of think, I know we're educating very differently right now. So some of these techniques and some of these questions might not necessarily apply to your current work, but maybe there might be some great ways to incorporate some mindfulness practices even into your Zoom meetings if you're doing them with your class or to the interactions that you're having currently with your class. But I do want to start off with a little brain break. I'm sure you're probably aware of what brain breaks are. It's mid-morning, it's Friday. My brain isn't quite woken up yet properly, and brain breaks are actually we know that they stimulate the brain, that mind-body movement helps us concentrate and focus, but they also do take a great bit of mindfulness to be able to successfully complete them. So what we're going to do, we're going to try this virtually just to show you that some of these things can be done virtually. So what I need everybody to do, and I promise you I'm not watching your video because it's off to the side, but what I need everybody to do is with your right hand, I need you to give me a thumbs up. Look, my thumb disappears in my background. I'm like, where can I put? Okay, thumbs up has to go in front of me. And then with your left hand, I just want you to point your finger to your right hand. So left finger is pointed, right thumb is up. Now here's where the brain break, the challenge comes in, is you need to switch those as best you can. So you should only have one thumb up and one finger pointed. And then you need to see how quickly you can go back and forth. And it's kind of funny, it might make us laugh, right? I've done this tons of times, so I can do it pretty fast. It's very similar to the whole pat your head, rub your tummy. Now, we all probably recognize those things as brain breaks, those mind-body challenges, but they do incorporate a certain level of mindfulness because they require us to be in the moment. We have to think about and put our attention on what we're doing so we can successfully complete the challenge. So I'm hopeful that, that you are doing brain breaks in your classroom. If not, that might be something good to start looking into, providing. There's tons of resources out there, tons of, internet searches you can do and come up with lots of great videos and ideas. So that's just a little quick one that I wanted to get us started. And those brain breaks require concentration and attention, and that is really what mindfulness is all about. So we know that children, they reflect the nervous system of the adults around them. So if we're tense, if we're stressed, that energy is going to be picked up by the children that are in our classrooms, that are in our presence, that we can even connect with virtually. So we know that mindfulness has a variety of research-based impacts. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we are going to focus on cultivating your own personal mindful practices, and we're going to touch a little bit on how you can do some of these things in your classroom. But any of the information that we review today, even just personally, you can start considering how you can do those things with your students. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a quick background. I actually am a mindful schools educator. I took a 14-week training back in 2018 to be able to come into schools and do mindfulness in the classroom with students. I like to quickly mention that simply because if you're interested in learning more, there is formal curricula out there and trainings out there where you can become a mindfulness educator. People like myself who don't necessarily work for school systems, we certainly could partner with teachers and professionals into coming into the classrooms and doing the mindfulness sessions with students. So it's a really great resource. It is, Mindful Schools is really kind of the premier provider of mindfulness-based instruction in school. So anytime I get a chance to talk to educators about mindfulness, I always like to mention Mindful Schools because they are a really great resource. They also, if you were to Google search them and find their website, they also have a free blog that you might be interested in if you're interested in learning more about putting mindfulness into the classroom, because in that blog they have many great resources and free activities that you can incorporate. So I would definitely encourage you to look into that. I do apologize. You might hear my dogs bark in a minute because we're getting a delivery. So you can never control when those things happen. I want to talk about mindfulness just in general. And I want to ask you if you've ever driven home and when you've got all the way to your house or to your garage or your parking spot, you realized you didn't remember a single thing about the drive. I don't know if that's happened to anybody. Maybe it hasn't happened to us recently because we are all, sheltering at home and staying home. But we don't remember the passing cars, the people walking, the sites that we passed. It's almost as if we were set on autopilot. Or maybe you've read a book and after a few pages you don't remember what you've read, or you're watching a television show or a movie or listening to the radio and you have no recollection of what you just saw or heard. So it's pretty common in our rushed, busy, stressful lives that we are on autopilot. We're not intentionally paying attention to our surroundings. And I like to use driving as an example because in my normal role as an extension professional, I do a lot of driving and I'm often on autopilot while I'm doing it. I'm not paying attention to my surroundings. I'm not being mindful of my route. It's kind of like my car just kind of automatically knows where to go. And during those times, our minds are filled with thinking about things that we have to do or things that we just did, and they're not centered on the present moment. So I'm just curious, can you think of other times in your life when you might be operating on autopilot? If you have any, if you could just pop them into the chat box. The end of the school year, right? Yeah, we get super busy. Our minds get distracted during meetings, certainly. Yeah, so we can probably think, and I'm just going to keep moving forward, but just continue to think about times and maybe start noticing in your own life when you are operating on autopilot, and you might find out that you're doing it more than you think. Some of kind of the everyday times when we're on autopilot, as we're leaving our house, or our home, putting the garage door down. That's often something that we're not cognizant of that we're doing. When we put down our keys or our phone somewhere, right? We're lost in thoughts of other things, so we're not cognizantly paying attention and being present in the moment. So yeah, there can be lots of times when we're just on autopilot. And when we are on autopilot, we're not likely as able to remember information. Okay, so really the key is to get ourselves off of autopilot when we need to, pay attention, when we need to remember information. And whenever I talk about living on autopilot in mindfulness, we're not always having to walk around in a mindful state. That's not what we're trying to say here. But there are many times in our life where we should be more focused on the present moment. And that's what mindfulness really is all about. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm just interested in also knowing if you suffer from washing machine brain. And you might say, what is washing machine brain? So let me give you the example. So it's been a busy day. It's been a long day. And you're sure that the second that your head hits the pillows, it's going to be lights out. But what happens? Your thoughts tumble around and around and around. And before you know it, you've been laying there lost in your thoughts for hours, right? And then you start doing bedtime math. If I fall asleep right now, I'm going to get 5 hours of sleep. Okay, if I fall asleep right now, I'm going to get 4.5 hours of sleep. So what's happening in that life situation is our minds like to live in a cycle of projection and rumination. So projection is when we're thinking about all the things that we have to do or all the things that are coming up, whether it's actual tasks like I need to go mail Mother's Day cards, or I need to bake that birthday cake today, or I need to send that email. Or if it's, I have to have that conversation tomorrow with that person and here's what I'm going to say. That's projection, thinking about all the things in the future. Rumination is thinking about everything that has happened during that day or in the past. So, we might be reviewing a conversation that we had. And sometimes they live in concert with each other. We'll be thinking about maybe a tense conversation we had with someone. So we're ruminating, but then we're also projecting by saying, oh, next time I see that person, I'm going to say X, Y, Z. So our minds can kind of get trapped in this cycle, and it can be harmful to our sleep and to our well-being if we don't know how to stop our brains from projection and rumination. And that's where, again, mindfulness can help. When we think about mindfulness, there's actually many definitions out there, but the most well-known definition is that it's the awareness that emerges from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and being non-judgmental to our thoughts as they occur. So I'm going to talk about the definition in a minute, but obviously mindfulness is paying attention. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it does begin there. And oftentimes when I talk to teachers about, or even parents about paying attention, how many times do we tell our students, our children, you need to pay attention? But do we tell people how to pay attention, right? And mindfulness is also the act of learning how to pay attention. Now, it might seem like, well, we all know how to pay attention. It's not that difficult of a skill, but when we engage in mindfulness, we're learning how to intentionally pay attention. So then that skill of paying attention becomes stronger when we're not intentionally meaning to do it. It's transferable, essentially. Mindfulness also includes an openness to new ways of looking at things and being willing to change based on new perceptions. Now, every time I give a mindfulness talk, I always tell people, take a deep breath, because you're probably already practicing mindfulness and you might just not know it. You might not label it as mindfulness. So I'm just going to ask this rhetorical question. What do you do when you see a pretty sunset or a pretty sunrise? Chances are you've already answered me in your head, and chances are you stop and you notice it. You might breathe, thank you. You become aware of it, right? And in that moment, whether it's 30 seconds, 3 minutes, however long you're engaging in that sunrise or sunset, you're stopping and you're paying attention to it. Now, we live in a very stressful world, and certainly our current, life situation is bringing about lots of stresses, both work-related and family-related and personally. When we are experiencing stress, a chemical called cortisol is released in our brain. And in small doses, cortisol is actually a helpful brain chemical. It does help us to respond to threats. It's that kind of the basis of that whole fight, flight, or freeze biological response, but we do know that when cortisol is released continually in our brain when we're under chronic stress, it can have some negative impacts on our overall brain health and on our overall well-being. So when we engage even in short little moments of mindfulness, like admiring a sunset, it is a tiny little break in that cortisol cycle, right? To give our brains essentially time and space to breathe and relax and just stop that, constant bathing of cortisol. It also gives us an opportunity to stop that cycle of projection and rumination, right? Now, it's not a magic wand. It doesn't, make everything better. But when we have these little moments of mindfulness in our daily life, we are giving ourselves the opportunity to engage in self-care and stop the stress response cycle and really take some benefit from those little daily moments. But the trick is that you have to be able to do that. I can't say, oh, Krista, you're really stressed out, you need to go look at the sunset. You need to take more time engaging in your surroundings and noticing the beauty of your surroundings. We have to kind of be our own advocates for that. So like I said, chances are you're probably already doing some mindfulness practices, and my hope today is that you start recognizing that you are, engaging in mindfulness on a daily basis, and also that you potentially start incorporating more mindfulness practices into your daily life for your personal benefit, which will then benefit the work that you do. All right. So I mentioned I was going to talk about a little bit more about the definition of mindfulness. When you type mindfulness into a Google search engine, you're going to get millions and millions and millions of results in like lickety-split seconds, right? So there's numerous scripts, books, videos, articles, workshops, retreats, lots of stuff available. One thing I like to point out about mindfulness, because some people kind of misinterpret it as kind of loose science or hippy dippy trippy, if you will, because we're talking about engaging in the present moment and meditation. Some people might not feel that it's as scientifically validated as it really is. This stat that I have is actually now 8 years old, but in 2012 alone, there were almost 500 professional papers published in scientific journals on the subject of mindfulness. So this is a very well researched type of intervention and technique of self-care that has been researched for at least the past 30 to 40 years. And it's likely that you've heard this term before. Most times people will say, let's be mindful of. I mentioned the definition of mindfulness a few minutes ago, but we can also think of mindfulness as the process of actively noticing new things, letting go of our preconceived mindsets, and acting on new observations. So we know through mindfulness that wherever you put the mind, the body will follow. And I really like that concept. So if we spend the majority of our days focusing on our stress, doing that projection rumination cycle, our body's going to follow that, right? We're going to have that pit of anxiety in our stomach. We're going to have increased heart rate. I just know personally through this whole situation, within the first month or so, I was regularly tuning in to the signals that my body was sending me regarding my stress level. I might not have had active thoughts of projection or rumination or stress or worry, but I would wake up with a pit in my stomach. I'll never forget the first day that I had to go pick up learning packets. It was 2 weeks, after the start of all this. I just had this knot in my stomach because things weren't the way they should be, and I was having to go to school, and I should be taking my kids to school, and my anxiety just showed up as this knot right in the center of my stomach. And luckily and thankfully, due to mindfulness, I was aware of that, and I could label it, and then I could implement some techniques to help that knot in my stomach go away, right? Like, so it was a really kind of powerful connection that I made of how my body, if I'm tuning into my body and I'm also paying attention to what's going on around me, that I can kind of make the connection and then implement some mindfulness practices to help relieve some of that stress intention. Yes, absolutely. It's important to use our signals that our body is telling us, but we have to acknowledge it, right? I could have just said, my stomach hurts, no big deal. But instead I took, in all the information that I had going on around me, I took in my environment, I paid attention to what my body was feeling like, and it was like, light bulb, okay, you probably need to do some deep breathing. You probably need to acknowledge mindfulness of emotion, the emotions that you're feeling, so you can then address it and move forward. So I also wanted to mention just briefly with mindfulness research, mindfulness practices can actually be traced back thousands of years. It's currently practiced across a variety of different spiritual and secular philosophical traditions. I think that's really important to point out, because sometimes when I talk about mindfulness, people think, oh, it's related to religion, it's related to spirituality. And there are certainly some mindfulness practices that are geared towards that. However, mindfulness really is a secular practice that is more about paying attention to your body, paying attention to your environment, than believing in one thing or a higher power. On the screen, you do see there kind of been three waves of three stages of the frontier of secular mindfulness. It first started in healthcare back in the 1970s. There was a researcher, John Kabat-Zinn. He is referred to as the father of modern mindfulness. He worked at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, and he was really interested in helping his patients with chronic pain alleviate their pain. So he developed some mindfulness-based interventions and worked with those patients to relieve some of their chronic pain. And without going too far into his story, he actually developed a mindfulness technique that's been used around the world. It's been practiced by thousands and thousands of people. There's actually practitioners that are trained in his technique that can deliver these mindfulness-based stress reduction interventions. So once it started in healthcare, it kind of moved on to mental health. With the growth of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. That was roughly in the 1990s. Those interventions were developed to treat clinical depression, and there was lots of research done as to how mindfulness can help the clinically depressed. And then the third wave, and the most recent wave, is mindfulness incorporating into the education field. While mindfulness in education was sporadically starting in the 1990s, the first round of formalized mindfulness education interventions really came about in the mid-2000s. And then that's when we see agencies and organizations like Mindful Schools starting to develop their practices. So question in the chat box, the man's name was John Kabat-Zinn, Z-I-N-N. I actually have a slide in a minute that I'm gonna show you about him. Okay, so we know, past 30, 40 years, mindfulness is becoming increasingly popular. We can start seeing it reflected in many of our, media outlets. And again, like I said, you can get lost in all of the resources that are out there. But I also wanted to point out that it's becoming so popular that many Fortune 500 companies, the NYU School of Business, they're requiring their employees and their students to take courses in mindfulness because of the benefits that they receive, especially when dealing with stress. And many big companies are, supporting their staff in training and learning more about mindfulness, and even giving them time to practice mindfulness meditation. So it really is becoming more and more mainstream, and it's being well recognized to help us deal with stress and the problems that can come about during difficult times. So I mentioned this is John Kabat-Zinn. His technique that he developed is called mindfulness-based stress reduction. Actually, here in the Sauk Valley, you would think, oh, this is something that's done in big cities. We actually have an MBSR practitioner right here in the Sauk Valley. Cannot think of the lady's name off the top of my head, but she does these classes usually at the United Way in Lee County. They're an 8-week class. They're pretty intense, but they really give people some great strategies to deal with stress by using mindfulness techniques. And the strategy was developed because the ultimate goal of mindfulness is to help quiet our busy minds and to help us more effectively deal with stress by putting our full attention on what we're doing. So some research demonstrated benefits of mindfulness are on the screen. We know that it can give us a better appreciation for life. It certainly can help with our focus and attention. Again, because when our mind is engaged in that cycle of projection and rumination, it can become very difficult for us to concentrate and hone in on the task at hand. And I often think of, children in our classrooms, their little minds can be engaged in a cycle of projection and rumination, especially those kids who might be experiencing some adverse childhood experiences, if their home life is unstable, or if they've had experienced trauma. Mindfulness can also assist us in handling our emotions. A lot of times when we talk about mindfulness, we think, oh, it's about breathing, it's about paying attention. We fail to recognize that mindfulness is also about acknowledging our emotions, and then instead of just automatically reacting on our emotions, it gives us time and space to reflectively react on the emotions that we're experiencing. And mindfulness can also help us combat multitasking. And I do want to say a word about multitasking for a minute, because I think we would all agree at one point in time, we probably thought of multitasking as a positive attribute. And if we're really being honest, how many of us are becoming masters of multitasking during this difficult time? I know that I am. Right now I have my children staring at me through these windows, at my French door windows, because they're trying to get my attention about help with schoolwork and can they have a snack. And so that's multitasking. In fact, I would argue that many of us, that has been probably the toughest transition that we've had from remotely working and working at home, is that we've had to become very good at task switching. We'll get right into an email or developing a lesson plan or working on a program or a project, and then our child needs something, or our spouse or partner needs something, or we get a phone call, or we get a delivery, or the dog has to go out. And it can be kind of very disruptive to us. So we know that with multitasking, researchers are starting to find evidence that multitasking leads to overall lower productivity and more mistakes. I will be honest with you and tell you that on some of my Zoom calls, I am answering emails while the Zoom call is going. Hopefully none of you are doing that right now, but if you are, I give you grace because it happens. But we know that when we're multitasking, we are going to make more mistakes, and we're less likely to remember that information in the future as well. And one study actually found that when we're multitasking with technology, so if we're watching TV, listening to the radio, checking email, it can actually cause structural changes in the brain, meaning there's less gray matter in the area of the brain that's responsible for decision making and emotional regulation. And we have Steve Jobs on the slide because he was kind of the founder of many of the technologies that kind of force us to multitask or also lead us to increased distraction, which I'm going to talk about next. But he was very well known for his meditation practices, and he attributed those practices to his ability to concentrate and ignore distractions. So with that, when we think about distractions, mindfulness is not only about learning how to pay attention and be in the present moment, it's also about learning how to deal with distractions. So as we start practicing mindfulness, as we start engaging in more mindfulness techniques, we're going to become distracted. Anytime we try to quiet our minds and focus on the present moment, it's kind of like our brain freaks out a little bit and says, wait, I got to think about something. So what are we having for lunch today? And did you do that task? And don't forget, you got to let the dog out. And You know, that can be very disconcerting, and it can also be very troubling when we start practicing mindfulness because we think, I'm not doing it right and I'm so distracted, right? Instead of getting lost in those thoughts that come in when we're trying to quiet our mind, we really need to accept that thought, let it come in, and then let it go right back out. I have this very vivid memory when I was taking my mindful schools training. I was actually doing some of the training in my office, and I had to do a mindful meditation, which I struggle with that. I'll be transparent and say that. It's very hard for me to sit for any length of time and just be quiet. Um, both with my mouth and in my brain. I'm kind of a active person that way. I was really struggling with some of the activities, and I'll never forget, I was doing this sit, and it had to be a 10-minute mindfulness meditation, and it started raining outside, and there was lots of noise, raining on the roof, hitting the window, and I was completely distracted by it, right? And I was getting frustrated at myself by saying, you're paying attention to the rain, you're not paying attention to your breathing or your anchoring thought. And I just had to say, you know what, let that go. It's raining. Acknowledge it. It's raining. Come back to your thought of breathing. And then when my mind would get distracted again, okay, yes, it's raining. You hear it on the window. Focus back on your breathing. And every time we kind of redirect our brain back to the mindfulness practice, whether it's breathing or paying attention to our surroundings, we are essentially building that mindfulness skill. So don't get distracted or don't get discouraged if you get distracted easily when we're doing some of these practices. So just a few more things about the benefits and research. I'm actually not going to read through all these, but I did just want to share that these are research indicated benefits of mindfulness. I already talked a lot about it improving stress and our well-being, talked about lowering our cortisol levels. Super interesting to me that some studies have found that mindfulness practices increases our immune response, which is just, I think that's on everybody's mind, these days, is how can we stay healthy? How can we boost our immune system? And reducing our stress levels, focusing on the present moment is certainly a way that we can do that. And we talked about my emotional regulation. So some specific research as identified by Mindful Schools as how mindfulness can benefit educators is, again, reducing that stress and burnout. Um, Educators have reported greater efficacy in doing their jobs, meaning they feel that they're doing their jobs better, they're more effective, they're more efficient when they're practicing mindfulness. And just one kind of anecdotal study showed that mindful educators have more emotionally supportive and even better organized classrooms, which was kind of an interesting finding. A couple other specific studies I just wanted to show you, and the one I'm going to point out on this screen is the study of middle school students. There was a study where the middle school teacher was leading the students in silent meditation at the beginning of the class for 6 weeks. After this, they found that those students were less likely than non-meditators to develop self-harm thoughts or suicidal ideation and behavior. So, we can really, this really points the strong evidence where mindfulness and being in tuned with your emotions can really have some great benefits. The other studies you see on the screen, mindfulness is starting to be used by the U.S. Marine Corps to help assist with trauma and as a trauma response for PTSD, and certainly the study on Alzheimer's disease and their patients and their caregivers has also proved to be very, very interesting results in terms of the benefits of mindfulness. So the rest of our time today, I want to focus on you, because in order to successfully implement mindful practices in your classroom or in your environment, it is essential that you start with yourself, your own personal practice. Mindfulness does start with you. Now, I can understand this can be a big ask, right? This is one more thing we have to learn about doing. This is one more thing that we have to try to incorporate into, our daily classroom life or just our daily way of living. But I promise you, you will get personal benefit out of this. And you are probably already doing many of these things that we're going to talk about. The other great thing about these mindfulness strategies that I'm going to review is it's not like working out your physical body. We all know 3 to 5 days a week, we need to walk, do cardio exercise for 30 to 60 minutes. That can be really hard to work into a busy schedule. The mindfulness practices we're going to review, they can be incorporated in as little as 5 minutes, sometimes as little as 3 minutes, okay, or even less than that. So my overall goal for you is that you start identifying with some of these practices that you might want to like to try. Now is the perfect time to start trying some techniques. And then over time, you will likely find that it becomes easier and easier to incorporate mindfulness naturally into your daily way of living. So in our mindful schools training, kind of to hit this point home, they go on to say, if you're a math teacher, you wouldn't teach math before learning how to do math yourself. So if you're wanting to incorporate mindfulness into your classroom, it is essential that you kind of start with yourself. And the good news is you don't need extensive training or experience to introduce mindfulness concepts in your classrooms or to your students. Like I said earlier, there's lots of information out there that can be easily accessed to start making this tiptoe introduction into mindfulness. All right, so let's talk about some specific practices. There are several different ways to practice mindfulness, and since it is the art and the act of focusing on and experience the present, it can really be applied to just about anything that you do in life. And like I said, if you need a little bit of guidance at first, there are several types of scripts available on the internet. There's lots of YouTube videos. One word of caution about YouTube videos, if you go and Google mindfulness, especially if you Google mindfulness meditation videos, you might run across meditation videos that are hours long. I know that I did. And those can be very overwhelming and really discouraging. You might think, oh, I can't meditate for an hour. I'm lucky I can get 5 minutes. So just recognize that there are people in this world that can meditate for hours, and good for them. They have really developed that skill. Just don't let that discourage you from engaging in some of these practices. Some studies have shown that even just 15 minutes of focused breathing and meditation can help people make smarter choices. I will tell you, just as an anecdotal practice, do what works for you. So what works for me in practicing mindfulness might not work for the next person in terms of technique, in terms of time, in terms of frequency. So you really have to kind of find your own little sweet spot when it comes to practicing mindfulness. All right, so these are just listed on the screen are just some ways that we can practice mindfulness, and we are going to talk about some of these in depth. So the first technique is the stop technique. Now, we probably have all heard of the stop and count to 10, right? When we get really mad or when we're experiencing a really strong emotion. That essentially is a mindfulness practice because we're buying time and space for our emotion to be acknowledged and responded to. And when we practice the stop technique, we actually are giving ourselves time and space to reflectively acknowledge the emotion that we're experiencing and then take action in hopefully a positive way. So what this involves is stopping, first of all, noticing that we're experiencing an emotion, and then taking a nice deep breath in. Generally, when we do mindful breathing, we want to breathe in through our nose and out through our mouth in a nice slow count. Then we need to observe what's going on around us, what's going on within us. Are we feeling that knot in our stomach? Are our palms getting sweaty? Are we feeling an increased heart rate? Observing those things, making note of them, checking in essentially with those physical experiences, and then making a decision on how to proceed. Now, this takes time. It's not like just, okay, a stimulus happens and then I'm going to stop and, work through it real quick. So essentially, if we're we need to give ourselves time to work through this process. And a lot of it is just being cognizant of it. So sometimes when we do the stop process, it's a good time to do some deep breathing exercises. My personal favorite one, because it's pretty easy to do anytime, anywhere. People don't even have to know that you're doing it. Certainly you can take deep breaths in and out whenever you need to. But a formal practice is called 4-count breathing, where you breathe in through your nose to a count of 4, and it's a slow 4. It's like a 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold it for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You exhale for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you pause for 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, in some practices, this is called square breathing. So you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, wait for 4. A couple other ways that you can do some deep breathing practices. This one is actually really great and easy for kids. It's called 5-finger breathing. You just take your hand, hopefully I'm holding it in front of me so you can see it, and you trace your fingers. And as you are going up the finger, you're inhaling through your nose, exhaling on the way down, inhaling, exhaling, and then you trace the finger. You can do it with an actual physical hand, or you can have a printout, or have the child even trace their hand and do the breathing practice there. The whole idea of that is just to getting us to connect with our breath. Again, it stops that cycle of projection and rumination. It stops that cycle of cortisol being released in our brains. And, it's, again, an easy practice that we can do anytime, anywhere. All right. So, because mindfulness can be incorporated into just about anything that we do, that includes things like washing the dishes. So does anybody actually like to wash the dishes? There's always a few, right? Where this is their favorite thing to do. If washing the dishes is your thing, awesome. But if it's not, it is possible to make washing the dishes a mindful activity by focusing on the little nuances that go into scrubbing your cookware spotless. So from the moment that you stack the dishes to the moment that you hang up the towel, it's about noticing every sensation. So the sound of the water running, the sight of the bubbles, the smell of the dishwashing liquid, the sounds of the silverware hitting each other, the feel of the dishes in your hand, the warmth of the water, connecting to that moment, moving slowly, not getting lost in our thoughts of projection and rumination, concentrating on our task rather than our to-do list. This is being present in our daily life. Now, whenever I mention chores like this, it's not to that every chore that we do and everything that we do from here on out, we need to do in a mindful manner. It's okay to use that time to think through things. We certainly need to allow time and space for that as well. But when and where we can, we should try to focus on the present moment, including when we're washing the dishes. So you could probably think of some other household chores or everyday activities that you could incorporate mindfulness to. If you have any ideas, throw them in the chat box. But it could be anything from vacuuming to, I saw earlier somebody said mowing the lawn. That can certainly be a mindless and a mindful activity depending on how you approach it. So, also, you don't have to incorporate it into the entire activity. You can just take little bits of it and say, for the 30 seconds, I'm going to focus on every sensation I'm experiencing. When I think about mindfulness, there's essentially 2 ways to practice it. One is an intentional way, meaning I'm going to set aside time, 15 minutes every day, where I'm going to focus on my breathing. I'm going to sit down, I'm going to get in a mindful body position, and I'm going to focus on my breathing. That's the intentional way. Or I'm going to wash the dishes, I'm going to be intentional about focusing on everything that's happening. The unintentional way of practicing mindfulness is those moments in life that kind of take us by surprise, like the sunset or sunrise. You can't really plan that out, right? So sometimes, you will find one way of practicing mindfulness is easier for you to get into than others. I will tell you, for me, it's very hard for me to say, I'm going to practice mindfulness at this time every single day and wrap it up in this nice little box. I much prefer to practice mindfulness spontaneously, seeing the sunset, seeing a pretty flower, taking note of some little small detail in my environment. Okay. So a couple more ways that we can practice mindfulness. We can always take a mindful walk. Mindfulness is about paying attention on purpose to the details around us. We can even do this as we're taking a walk. You can do this in a couple of different ways. One way is to check in with the physical sensations that your body is experiencing, right? So feeling your feet hit the pavement, feeling your feet hit the floor, feeling your leg muscles moving, noticing your breath as you are walking. And again, you can practice mindful walking anywhere. You can do it down the hallway at your school. And you don't have to, again, you don't have to do it for 5, 10, 20 minutes. Even if you're just doing a little check-in. Okay, I feel my feet in my shoes. I feel my, my muscles contracting. That is incorporating mindfulness. The other way that you can incorporate mindfulness in mindful walking is to notice the sensations in your environment. So everything that you are seeing, hearing, feeling, touching, tasting, smelling, that is a great way to incorporate mindful walking. Now, I do that practice actually out in nature. That seems to work best for me. Actually, when this whole thing started, I got into a habit of taking daily walks with my boys. That's what we would do over my lunch hour. It's a great little way to break up our day. And I decided one day that we were going to play a game while we were walking. And as we're walking, we live in the country, so as we were walking down the road, from this fence post to this fence post, we were going to be quiet and we were going to notice with our eyes everything that we saw. And we would do that. And then from the next fence post to the next fence post, we're going to notice everything that we heard. That is taking a mindful walk. And my kids actually started requesting to play that game every time that we were take a walk. Did we play it for our entire walk? No, but we incorporated that into our walk, and it really did reap benefits because we were quieting ourselves. And it wasn't like we were like, okay, now kids, we're gonna play this quiet game where we have to be good, and there were no rules. It was, hey, let's do this, and we were getting all the benefits from mindfulness. Thanks, Beth. Yeah, silence game. So you will find once you start looking into these mindfulness techniques, because there's such well-practiced techniques, there are many different names and kind of procedures for implementing those things. Great. So one other daily technique that I want to talk about is mindful eating. This is another easy way that we can incorporate mindfulness into our daily practice. This is also a great thing that we could do with our students, during snack time, or even just teaching them a way to mindfully eat. When we are mindfully eating, we are essentially eating slowly, and we are noticing the food that we're eating. I will tell you, I don't abide by this a lot during my normal life. Think about it, I'm in my car a lot, so I'm generally shoving food in my mouth as I'm going from one place to the next place. I'm not really enjoying my meal. I'm not taking note of the benefit that it provides me. So when we do mindful eating, we want to notice, the shape, color, texture, taste, and really enjoy and savor the moment of eating that piece of food. And this is a really easy way that we can slow down and enjoy our meal more. Now, you don't have to eat every meal like this. You can even just take a little piece of chocolate and engage in a mindful eating activity, or a raisin, or a slice of orange. There's lots of different ways that you can engage in mindful eating, but the point is to be slow about it and really notice what you're experiencing in that moment. And what happens when we eat food in that way, we tend to become satisfied more easier, excuse me, because we are really taking the time to enjoy what we're doing. So oftentimes when I talk about mindfulness, people are like, oh, this is all great, but where do I start? How do I incorporate this into our daily life, right? And this is a great practice that I found. It's called the 5-3-1 practice. So it does involve meditating 5 minutes a day. I'm like, oh, I can do this, right? I can sit quietly for 5 minutes a day and pay attention to my breathing. Sometimes that word meditate really kind of worries people because they think, oh, I have to sit in a certain place and I have to, have music going on in the background. It's simply just sitting quietly, focusing on your breathing. You can do it outside. You can still, while you're focusing on your breathing, you can still, check in with your body sensations. You can check in with all the sounds that you're hearing. There's many different ways to practice meditation. Part of practicing mindfulness is also about gratitude and kindness and self-compassion. So identifying 3 good things each day, in an act of gratitude. Some days it's going to be the big things, some days it's going to be the little things. But once we start getting into the practice of being grateful and acknowledging what we're grateful for, it starts becoming like second nature. And then extending at least one act of kindness every day. So letting that inward change go outward. This is kind of the tiptoe way into starting incorporating more mindfulness into your daily life. So I do see in the chat box the Calm app is absolutely a great app. To try. There's many great apps out there. Stop, Breathe, Think is another one. For a while, the Calm app was actually offering a free subscription to educators. The last time I checked into that, they had such an overwhelming response that they had to discontinue that for a time being. But I believe there's a wait list that you can get on. Certainly it is a free app and it has things that you can use without subscription. But that might be something you might be interested in looking forward to. All right, so one other thing I want to talk about, this is a 5 senses scan is another quick way that we can incorporate mindfulness even to our students. This is also called a grounding activity. It kind of has its basis in helping people who deal with anxiety. But the idea here is in our environment, no matter what environment you're in, you could even do this right in the seat that you are sitting in right this moment. You need to notice 5 things that you can see. Now, obviously we can see the big things, but try to turn your attention to the little small things that you normally don't notice. Maybe it's a shadow, maybe it's a crack, or a peeling paint. The little small things that aren't as noticeable. And then you would notice 4 things that you could feel. So bring your attention to the things that you're currently feeling. In terms of textures, a lot of times we think, oh, we only feel with our hands, but we actually feel with our whole body. So, feeling the breeze on our skin, even the smooth surface of the table that our hands are resting on. The next one is noticing 3 things that you can hear. This is a great one to practice outside. It's probably one of my favorite ones to practice outside, but tuning in to the small and the big noises that we hear in our environment. Might be a chirp of a bird, the hum of a refrigerator, the ticking of the clock hands, faint sounds of traffic, tuning into those sounds. 2 things that you can smell is the next process in the scan. Usually we filter out smells, pleasant or unpleasant, but searching the air for a whiff of something. I always think about it when I go into town and I go by a fast food place and you smell, oh yeah, I'm by McDonald's. True story, when I was in college, the town next to my college there was the Lender's bagel plant, and you could tell the days that they made the blueberry bagels because the whole town smelled like blueberry bagels, and it was a great smell. But searching the air for 2 smells that you can smell. And then the last one is one thing that you can taste. So what is the current taste in your mouth? Did you just take a drink of pop? Have you had a piece of candy? Did you have a mint? Searching your mouth for that taste. This is a really quick exercise, and it's relatively easy that can bring you into a mindful state very, very quickly. All right, so we are going to just kind of close out. I wanted just to pose this question to get you to think how you can bring mindfulness benefits to the work that you're doing with your students. So certainly by joining today, you are starting off on this path to increasing your mindfulness practices. Even developing your own personal practice is taking a step towards bringing this to your students. looking more into mindfulness curricula and implementing those strategies in your classroom, and even just becoming a mindful educator yourself or partnering with someone who is. So I hope that you really take this information today and consider how you can use it to your benefit personally and also to your professional benefit. So today we did talk a lot about the definition of mindfulness, the benefits of mindfulness meditation, and we also reviewed several different techniques that you can use to incorporate mindfulness to increase your overall life satisfaction. And I do hope that you take this information, that you incorporate it into your daily practices, whether it's intentional or unintentional, when you notice that you need it. Okay, but I want to leave you with a closing thought, and then I do have some resources that I can share with you. So it really is up to us. Okay, and I would like to make the argument. I have 2 dogs. They're actually not in this room with me right now. But dogs are inherently mindful, right? Think about it. They live in the here and now. They like to live in a place of happiness and joy. They don't hold on to feelings of resentment, anger, or sadness. They're not worried if we're coming back when we leave them. And when we do come back, they don't judge us and say, "Where have you been all day?" Right? "I've been looking at you." They are happy. They are filled with joy when we are around. It's almost as if they know that their time on earth is short. They accept who they are, and they don't pretend to be something that they're not. They can enjoy a beautiful day for what it is and not miss out due to projection and rumination. So my question for you is, who do you prefer to be in this image? You do have a choice. You can be mindful or you can be mindful, especially during these difficult times. And I don't know about you, but my choice is pretty clear. I choose to live more like a dog, living in the sun, enjoying the moment of, the blue sky, the warmth of the sun on my skin, the gentleness of the breeze, and really taking that time for myself as an important aspect of self-care to block out that projection and rumination, to block out that stress so I can care better for myself, which in turn help me care better for other people. So before I take questions, start popping them in the chat box if you have them. And if not, no worries. I did want to just direct you to a couple of resources that we currently have going on through Extension. We are focused on being innovators during this difficult time. A lot of the work that we do is in person. And since we're not able to do that right now, we're kicking off a bunch of different digital education campaigns. And one of those just happens to be Mindful May. And I would definitely encourage you to check out some of our resources on Mindful May. This month, every day, we are doing blogs, we are doing Facebook and Instagram posts. We are releasing some videos about specific mindful practices that people can do, demonstrating the practices that people can do for themselves, with their families, or in other groups. So on the screen right now, I do have the link to our Mindful May blog site. It's Family Files. It's go.illinois.edu Family Files. I have a couple of more, and I can always send these to Krista too if you want to send them out later. We created this great resource. This is one of my colleagues. Her name's Tessa. She actually created a daily mindful calendar for May, which is available on our Around the Table Facebook page. So again, I've included the short URL to get to that Facebook page. This was also featured on Instagram. And I'm just looking quickly. Today, our mindful practice of today that we should try is, when listening to a song, focus in on an instrument for the entire song. So like, just listen to the drums, or just listen to the piano, or just listen for the guitar for the entire song. So really look for that great resource. We were so thrilled to have this and give this out. And then we are also featuring mindful moments. As I mentioned, this mindful moment happened to be on mindful eating. It did have all the steps to walk through for mindful eating. And again, that is on our Around the Table Facebook page and on our Family Finances and Food Instagram page. So I hope that you really use these great resources to really benefit your personal mindful practices. So with that, right on the nose, well, 11:16, so a little over, but there's any questions, I can definitely hang around. I know I saw some people had to skip out to go to different meetings and trainings, and I certainly understand that. We are full of those things nowadays, which is a good thing. So if anybody has any questions, I'll stop sharing my screen.
And I will come on. Karla, thank you so much. Every time I hear you, I feel refreshed and I feel ready to kind of do some self-care and refill myself so I can be there for others. So
Excellent.
happy Teacher Appreciation Week to you, Miss Karla, because you are a teacher of other teachers and adults, and that is so important. And to all the teachers on today, I appreciate each of you and all that you've been doing for your students, for your families and your communities. You are appreciated. Happy Mother's Day. Take some time to relax, be mindful, and enjoy your weekend. So thank you to everyone. Have a safe and healthy weekend. And next week, we'll be back with just daily. We'll have one meeting a day, kind of rolling out our summer plans. And Miss Karla will be back. She will end our week next Friday, talking about things that we can be doing outside, some summer activities. So I can't wait for that either. So,
Yeah.
all right. I think I didn't see any other questions in the chat, so we will end on that. So thank you to everyone.
Yeah.
Be
Bye,
safe.
everybody. Take care. Be mindful.